I'm so glad that you're in the house today. I'm excited to get into week 11 of Jesus Amazed. Who has been here for all 11 weeks so far? Good for y'all. That's so great. The rest of you are dead to me. And no, I'm kidding. I'm glad that you're here. Maybe this is your first time. I want to explain to you what we do here at Revive Church. We take topics from our lives, topics from the Bible, and we see what God says about them in the scripture, in the Bible. We pull out what God says because we want you to know God better. And one of the best ways to know God better is to find out what the Bible says about Him and about you and how you work together. And so we've been talking about the topic of faith in this learning series, Jesus Amazed. Now, as a follower of Jesus, I get my definition of faith, and we get our definition of faith from Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. The book of Hebrews is in the New Testament, and here's what it says in what's called the Amplified Version. It says, now faith is the assurance. Now, it amplifies this meaning. It's the title deed or the confirmation. It means I have ownership of things hoped for or divinely guaranteed. It's the evidence of things not seen. It's the conviction of my reality because faith comprehends as fact what cannot be experienced by the physical senses. So faith says when I ask God for it, it's already done. Faith says when I'm believing for it, it's already done. Even though I can't see it, I can't feel it, I can't touch it, I can't smell it, that kind of thing. No, it's okay because faith comprehends as fact what cannot be experienced by the physical senses. Then just a few verses later, we read this in verse 6. Without faith, it's impossible to please Him because he who comes to God must believe that He is and that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So in this learning series, what we've been talking about is the difference between faith that pleases God and faith that amazes God. Now, you need to go back to week 1 to understand that entire topic of amazing God with your faith. But we talked about it in week 1. So download the Revive Church app, go follow along with that. But we believe that there is a faith that pleases God, a faith that believes that God is, that He rewards us. That's a faith that pleases God. That's a safe faith. That is a faith that will get you to heaven. If you believe that Jesus came down to earth, that He died for your sins, that He was put in a grave, and 3 days later, God raised Him from the dead, that's the foundation of what we believe as followers of Jesus. That will get us to heaven. That will cause us to be saved. But there is a faith that amazes God. It's a faith that not everybody operates in. It's a faith that stops God in His tracks and goes, whoa, I didn't know humans could have that measure of faith. Again, go back to week 1 and you'll know what we're talking about. Today, though, I want to discuss the topic of talking the talk before you walk the walk. Now, you may have heard this saying before. There's different variations of it. But have you ever heard somebody say, hey, boy, you better walk the walk before you talk the talk? Because you always hear somebody who is always talking. Now, you know that person. The person who says the dumbest things. They just talk and talk and talk and talk. They brag about things they've never done. They talk about, I know somebody, I grew up with somebody. He still does the same thing to this day. He talks about the next business he's going to start. He talks about the next scheme he's going to go through, the next scam or whatever. He just talks and talks and talks. Never follows through, but just talks and talks and talks. And it's annoying because they seem condescending, right? And you're like, just shut up and do something, dude. You got to learn to walk the walk before you talk the talk. In other words, don't try to talk about pridefully or victoriously something that you have no proof to back up. And so we live like this because a lot of us, we want to see results before we hear you talk about what you've done. We are visual people. I'm the kind of guy that when I see a YouTube ad for real estate investing, and it's this guy who screeches up in a Lamborghini, and he gets out, and all of a sudden, like 20 bikini-clad women come around him, and he's in front of this big mansion, and he's like, if you want my life, all you got to do is take my class for free, and then $10,000 later, you finally have his actual course. There's always somebody on YouTube who is showing you. There's always someone on social media who's showing you what the best life is and what they have. And what you don't understand is looks can be deceiving. Trust me, those women are not like a part of that guy's clan. They got paid to be in that commercial. That Lamborghini is not his. You can go rent. Did you know you can rent a Lamborghini for like $250 a day? Some of you are like, I'm going to go do that right now. Yes. Yeah, you can rent on Airbnb a mansion and put it in a commercial. It doesn't have to be your. People do this all the time. Looks can be deceiving. And here's what I believe. I believe that while we like to say, walk the walk before you talk the talk, show me your results before you brag about it, I believe God has a very different view. I believe that God is an advocate that we learn to talk the talk before we walk the walk. In John chapter 20, Jesus has been resurrected. He comes back and he starts meeting with his disciples, and his disciples are like, whoa, this is amazing. And here's what Jesus says to this guy named Thomas. Thomas doubted that Jesus was actually resurrected until he actually saw Jesus. And Jesus said, because you've seen me, you have believed. But blessed are those who have not seen me and yet have believed. Another translation says, more blessed are those who have not seen me and yet believe. Here's what I believe. I believe there is a level of blessing that's greater than what the disciples had because we choose to follow Jesus. We believe in Jesus and have never seen him. Now, I know you're thinking you have because your parents had that thick Bible on the dinner table or on the coffee table. Mine was on the piano, and it had gold binding around the edges. And on the front was a white Jesus with flowing hair, and it looked like wind was pushing it back. That's not what Jesus actually looked like. You didn't actually see Jesus. Some of you think you saw him on the internet. You didn't see him on the internet. And yet you still believe. And Jesus said there's a blessing for that. I believe so strongly that God believes that we need to talk the talk before we walk the walk because talking is actually the conception of our salvation. Romans 10:9-10 says it this way. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Because with your heart you believe and are justified, and with your mouth you profess and are saved. The biggest misunderstanding, everyone listen to me, the biggest misunderstanding about following Jesus is that you can't be saved unless you start acting right. That is the biggest load of you know what. God is not waiting for you to come to him perfectly before he saves you. He's waiting for you to believe it and then speak it out, and that's when you are saved. So you better be careful whose salvation you're judging. Be careful who you talk about, saying they're not saved. They may not be completely sanctified, but they got saved the day that they believed in their heart that God raised Jesus from the dead and spoke with their mouth that Jesus is Lord. Just because it's taken a little bit longer than it did for you, you holy roller, that does not mean they are not saved. So watch your face. I get angry when people do that. Sorry. Romans 4:17 says this, that God calls things that are not as though they were. In other words, God speaks. We have this image of God on a throne in heaven. He's just sitting there judging. That's all he does. God is not sitting on a throne judging. God is sitting in heaven speaking. God calls things that are not as though they were. Let me put it to you this way. God has faith. God believes. Now, his faith is different than our faith because he has God faith, right? I mean, if he speaks something, he never doubts because his faith would technically be in himself and he knows he doesn't fail. So in that case, it's like, wow, that's amazing. But God calls things that are not as though they were. God gives life to the dead. God calls things that are not as though they were. In other words, God is speaking things over you that you don't even believe yourself. God believes in you more than you believe in yourself. God believes in your healing more than you believe in your healing. God believes that prayer is answered before you even believe that prayer is answered. I want to take you to Mark chapter 5. Now, in Mark chapter 5, we looked at this already. We studied the woman with the issue of blood in this learning series, Jesus Amazed. But Mark chapter 5 also has a story surrounding the woman with the issue of blood. It's the story of Jairus and his daughter. And if you would, go to Mark chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 21. If you have the Revive Church app, open up. It'll also be on the screen behind me. Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21. Now Jesus had crossed over again to the other side, and a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. Jesus always had followers everywhere. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came to him. His name was Jairus. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He begged him earnestly, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. So come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and she will live." Now, here's what I want you to understand. Jairus has pleasing faith. Jairus had a faith to believe like everybody else believed. We've talked about this in this series. Everybody in these times thought, if I can just get Jesus to come pray for this person, if I can just get Jesus to lay hands on this person. So this is a traditional faith. He's seen this happen before, and he's going to bet that Jesus can come, lay hands, pray for, and his daughter will be healed. So Jesus went with them, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now, between verses 24 and 35 is the woman with the issue of blood. We've covered that. You can go to the Revive Church app and watch that, learn along with that. Verse 35 says, while Jesus was still speaking, while he's talking to the woman about her faith, some people came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, from Jairus' house, and they said to him this, "Your daughter is dead." Final. No turning back. So why bother Jesus anymore? Why bother Jesus? Your daughter's dead. As soon as Jesus heard this word, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, what I want to say to you today, do not be afraid, only believe. Do not be afraid, only believe. And he permitted no one to follow him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of Jairus, and he saw what's called a tumult. A tumult in these days was a group of people. Sometimes they were hired, but most of the time it was just crowds of people, could have been family and friends. And they're outside, and they are screaming. They are weeping. They are wailing. And when we picture this, I know we just picture, people sniffling. No, they're literally going, like when German shepherds get annoyed with things, they're like, that's what it sounded like. And when Jesus came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child's not dead, she's only sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and mother of the child and those who were with him. Remember Peter, James, and John. He entered where the child was lying, and he took the child by the hand. He said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately, talked about that last week, another immediately miracle. Immediately the girl arose and walked, and she was 12 years of age. They were overcome with great amazement, and he commanded them strictly that no one should know about this. And this is my favorite part of this story, or any Bible story. And Jesus commanded them to give her a sandwich. That is the best part right there. He said, give her something to eat. He said, she's been dead, she's hungry, give her something to eat. I preached a message one time about that. I said, when God does something for you, he's not going to do just enough. He'll go just over the edge to perform more than what you thought he could do. In other words, God knows every need. He knew she needed to be raised from the dead. He also knew she needed a sandwich, and so he got her a sandwich. Praise the Lord. Oh, thank you, Jesus. I felt that. When we talk about talking the talk before we walk the walk, I think it's difficult for some people to understand this. And here's how I want to expound on this. I believe that Jesus says for us, God says for us as followers of Jesus, to learn to talk the faith talk before we walk what we think is the faith walk. And here's where I want to just hone in on this. I got 3 points for you just real quick. And I believe that I really, really believe that this is for our church. I know it was for the first service because all of them walked in with coffee. They were hyped up on caffeine, and they still stared at me like I was a ghost. So I know that they were getting something out of this. But here's my first point. You have to know that when you're talking the talk, you cannot let other people talk over your talk. You can't let other people talk over you. When you're believing God for something, you cannot let other people talk over your talk. Now, most people think I'm talking about people talking loudly. No. Let me give you an example. If you started bursting out loudly and screaming things in this church, guess what? People will give you a glimpse of their attention, but you have no authority in this house. I'm the pastor, I'm the leader, I'm the communicator. So guess what will happen? People will look at you like you're stupid and crazy, and then they'll put their attention back on me. Here's why. Because I won't stop preaching just because you started screaming. Because I know I have the authority at Revive Church. Now, please don't do that. And don't go to another church and do that. I don't go to another church down the street and try to preach from the crowd. Why? Because I have no authority in that house. What I mean is this: don't let other people talk with authority over your talk of faith. You can choose to believe other people over what you're believing God for. It's very easy. You know what it's like. The more that you wait on God to perform a miracle, the more that you don't see the miracle, it's easier to listen to other people. Other people love to speak with authority. I love when people who don't know my story try to tell me what to do. In fact, my job, even though I don't know your story, is to tell you what to do sometimes. And it can be very difficult. I love when people speak to me with authority, like they know what I'm going through. They know what I'm dealing with. They know what I'm believing God for. Here's the thing. When you're believing God for something, there are times where people will start to tell you things that are contrary to what you're believing Him for. The people from Jairus' house showed up to Jesus, and here's what they said: "Your daughter is dead." That's a very authoritative statement. That's a final statement. There is no turning back. Your daughter is dead. Stop bothering Jesus. There are some people in your life who tell you, why do you keep going back to that church? Why do you serve? Why do you give? Why do you tithe? Why do you pray? Don't try to bother God anymore. Don't bother showing up to church anymore. Because if God was real, if that stuff was real, it would have already happened. And what they're doing is they're trying to tell you they are God and they decide when God moves. You are not God. You don't decide when He moves. So I'm going to keep trusting what God says. So don't let other people talk over your talk. Number two is this: when they talk, remember this: Jesus is not moved by their talk. Jesus is not moved by their talk. I love this description. When you read the Bible, please pay attention to what it says. Do not just skim through. Read every word. Put yourself in the story and go, what is happening here? Because as soon as Jesus heard what they said, listen to me, Jesus heard them. Jesus hears all the complaints. Jesus is God. He knows what everybody is saying to you. He knows what everybody is saying contrary to what He says. What I love about this story is even though Jesus heard what they said, He did not respond to them. He looked at Jairus and He said, "Don't be afraid, only believe." Another writer in one of the other Gospels, I can't remember if it's Matthew, Luke, or John, but another writer in this specific story, they say it this way. They say, as soon as Jesus heard what they said, He ignored them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, only believe." What you've got to get in your heart of hearts, what you've got to get in your mindset, what you've got to get in your opinion, what you've got to get in your day-to-day life is that just because other people speak things over you does not mean that God has changed His mind about you. This is so crazy. If Jesus is not moved by their talk, why are you? Just as quiet. That's good. You know why you're moved by their talk? Because you've put more faith in what they say about you than what God has said about you. This is the most interesting part of the story, is that when Jesus hears what they said, He ignores them and He says, "Don't be afraid, only believe." Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, only believe. Did not tell those people, "Oh, well, how dare you?" That's not true. Notice this, Jesus didn't defend Himself. And Jesus doesn't need you to defend Him. Jesus is Jesus. If you believe what Jesus said, stop listening to what other people have said about you. He said, "Don't be afraid, only believe." And then here's what it says. It says, then He took Peter, James, and John. He only allowed Peter, James, and John. Here's some clarification for you. You have to know when it's time to remove people and when it's time to invite people into what you're believing God for. Now, here's a teachable moment. Listen to me. When Jesus heard them, he said, do not be afraid, only believe. And then he only allowed Peter, James, and John to come with him into the house to see the miracle happen. Now, what I learned growing up is any negative person in your life, you just put them out, put them out, put them out. You don't need negativity in your life, put them out. And I get that. But we also operate not just in truth, but in grace. So there are times where people are abusive, you need to cut them out of your life. There are times where people are overly aggressive, yes, cut them out of your life for a season, let God deal with them. But notice, Jesus allowed Peter, James, and John. Here's what I believe. I don't believe that Peter, James, and John 100% believed that Jesus was going to heal this girl. I could be wrong, and when we get to heaven, God can deal with it then. But I believe as a human being that those three guys did not perfectly believe that Jesus was going to heal her. The reason I don't is because I'm a human being and I've seen miracles. And sometimes I still have trouble believing. There are some of y'all that are believing God for some things and I'm like, are you sure? Do you know you? Have you seen you lately? I'm thinking like, you really think God's going to do, okay, all right. I know I'm your pastor. I know I love you, but sometimes I'm still like, are you sure? You got to understand, Peter, James, and John had just watched a woman who was gushing blood on the ground fight her way through the crowd to get to Jesus. She touched the hem of his garment, and then her and Jesus start having a conversation, and Peter, James, and John are still trying to figure out what just happened right there. It's like that meme of the lady who's trying to do math in the air, and she's like, I believe this is the point that Peter, James, and John are at. They're just sitting there going, what just happened? What's going on? And then in the middle of trying to figure out that miracle, they heard that the little girl had already died. I don't know about you. My faith is not there yet to where when I hear that someone dies and the funeral's going on, that I show up to the funeral to try to get him out of the casket. I'm not there yet. Maybe one day, but not yet. So please don't die, because you will die. She said. Maybe if you die here, we'll pray for you, but if you're already in the casket going down, I'm like, nah. No time left. But here's what he said. It says he took Peter, James, and John. Here's why I believe that he took Peter, James, and John. Because Peter, James, and John kept their mouths shut. Because while everybody else said that the girl is dead, while everybody else is agreeing with the messengers that the girl is dead, Peter, James, and John kept real quiet. Jesus had 12 disciples. Why did he only take 3? So they went into the house with him. And here's the third point. You have to learn to keep talking even when it's ridiculous. You have to learn to keep talking the talk even when it's ridiculous. Jesus said, why this commotion? Why are you out of control? Why are you weeping? Why are you so depressed? Why are you staying in bed for weeks at a time? Why are you letting that person be your booty call? Why are you being somebody else's booty call? Why are you acting a fool? Why are you treating that person with such unforgiveness all the time? Why? Why are you doing these things? He said, that girl's not dead. She's asleep. Okay, pause. That's stupid. I'll say it for you. I know all the good Christians in here are like, oh, he's going to hell. Oh, Lord. Let me talk from a reality standpoint. From someone who, maybe you're not a Christian, you're not a follower of Jesus, and you hear this story. Can we just nod along and agree? You don't have to nod along, but can we just agree for a second? Jesus showing up to a dead girl's house and then saying she's not dead, she's only sleeping is stupid. They knew to check the pulse. Her skin is clammy. It's white. It's pale. She's turning purple slowly. She's starting to jaundice. She's dead. Saying that a girl is only sleeping when she is dead. There is no breath coming out of her lungs. And he says, oh no, she's not dead. She's only sleeping. That's stupid. Most of us wouldn't let Jesus in the house after he said that. Bro, I ain't got time for you. when he said the child's not dead, she's only sleeping, the Bible says that they ridiculed him. Ridiculed. That word does not just mean they made fun of Jesus. It means they mocked him. They had anger in their hearts toward him. How dare, because here's the thing, with one word, Jesus made everybody else look like a fool. And it hurts when Jesus speaks something positive over you that you have believed negatively. They were already making a commotion, and Jesus said, she's not dead, she's only sleeping. How dare you? And they ridiculed him. They started getting angry with him. I imagine these people booing him. I imagine these people telling Jesus to, well, I can't say that in church. I do. I imagine them using words that we can't say in church. And you shouldn't say outside of church either. I imagine them getting just angry with Jesus. But here's what Jesus said. He put them out. Let me tell you about the real Jesus. Our mission here at Revive Church is to introduce real people to the real Jesus. Let me tell you about the real Jesus. The real Jesus is not cute. He does not have Vidal Sassoon hair. The real Jesus is a man. The real Jesus has authority. The real Jesus is a healer. And the real Jesus does not mess around. The word for "and he put them out" in the Greek does not mean that Jesus went to the front door, opened it, and said, "Will you please get out? You're being very mean. You're hurting my feelings. I don't think it's right that you're making fun of me for my beliefs. Could you please go? I have a miracle to perform here." The word for "put them out" means he aggressively snatched their wigs and threw them out the house. It means Jesus had had enough. He said, "You are not going to stand between me and the life of a little girl." You better understand something. When God speaks something, there is no devil in hell, no friend that you've got, no Instagram message. No one can stop what God has spoken into the world. When he said she's not dead, she's only sleeping, he was not about to let a crowd of angry weepers get in his way. He said, "I will snatch you and put you out, or you can get out on your own. But either way, bye, Felicia. I ain't got time for you no more. Get out." And he put them out because he understood the severity while they're sitting there talking to him. "But Jesus, that's not how we used to do." Okay, boomer, bye. Jesus is not tradition. Bye. I'm not here for tradition. I'm here for a miracle. Sometimes miracles happen in the most untraditional, incompetent way. Jesus said she's not dead, she's only sleeping. I came to prophesy to you today. Every dream that you thought was dead, it's only asleep. Wake it up. Every hope that you thought was dead, wake it up. Every dream, every marriage, every child, wake it up. Wake it up. Wake it up. Stop telling everybody it's dead. Jesus says it's not dead, it's just sleeping. You thought it was dead. Fool, get out. You've got to learn to talk even when it's ridiculous. Because it is ridiculous to talk faith talk in the midst of people that are telling you that what you believe is ridiculous. It's stupid. It will not happen. God is not real. Faith is not real. The Bible is inerrant. It's not real. Church is just an organized religion, a way for pastors to get money out of you. They will tell you everything that you do not want to hear. And you've got to be ready to say, "It's not dead. It's still sleeping. No. My healing is just asleep. It just hasn't woken up yet. It's okay." I'll tell them the first service. That's where pastors are like, "No, devil, you can't have this. You can't have this service. You can't have," no. I was telling the first service, I've shared with you a little bit about a year ago, I got into an accident. And the past month or so, I've been going to a couple specialists. And they've given me worse news than the time before. As it started, it was like, it's getting better. And then they started producing this worse news. And here's the thing. It's very hard. I know people think, man, Pastor Stephen's got so much faith. Man, Pastor Stephen just gets up there. He's so passionate, excited. I wish I had that measure of faith. I wish I could be that excited about God. Can I tell you something? The reason I have to get this excited about God is because I'm not only battling your unbelief, I'm battling my own. You forget I'm still human. And when you walk out of the doctor's office and they tell you something that's contrary to what you're believing, it is very difficult to sit down and write a message about faith and about healing and about talking about how Jesus is going to do what you're believing. It's very difficult. You think I wake up on Sunday mornings and just miraculously have a message for you. No. I have to live out what I'm talking about. And for you've got to know, when you believe God for something, there will be people who will come around you and begin to tell you that things are dead. Don't be afraid, only believe. Don't let them talk over your talk. Remember that you have the authority of Jesus Christ when you speak things in faith that glorify God, that match up with what he said will happen. When you speak things according to his will, according to his purpose, they're already done on earth as it is in heaven. You've got to know that not only can you not let them talk over your talk, but there's going to come times where people will start talking about how God doesn't even believe what. If God was going to do it, he would have done it by now. And I always go back to Abraham and Sarah. There was this couple in the Old Testament, and Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah was 90 years old. And at the age of 75, God spoke to Abraham and said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. I'm going to give you a son. And Abraham was like, you sure? He looked at his 65-year-old wife. He said, I guess. And from the age of 75 to the age of 100, 25 years, he had to wait for the promise to happen. Not only did he have to wait for the promise to happen, but the promise had to happen when there was no discernible evidence that it could ever happen. I'm going to hope and pray you have never seen a naked 100-year-old man. But I'm pretty sure that a naked 100-year-old man is not that sexy. Everybody always talks about Sarah. What about Abraham? I'm pretty sure that at the age of 90, her womb was dried up. I know that for a fact because the book of Hebrews talks about how her womb was dried up. I'm pretty sure Abraham, his sperm stopped swimming at the age of 100. They're in a retirement home in his loins, like they're done. But not only did God give Abraham a word at 75, he made him wait 25 years for it. I think about Noah when God said there will be a flood. It's going to rain. And Noah said, what's rain? It's never rained before. Build an ark. What's an ark? And for the next 100 years, all he does is build, no rain, not a drop. And people are criticizing him. Noah, you're foolish. What are you doing? I think about our church. I think about when God told us to start this church, and we have had vision for this church that hasn't come to pass yet. And I think about day one when people were telling me, it's a foolish dream. Don't do it. You're not qualified. You're not mature enough. You don't have the money for it. The people won't be there. I think about all those things, and I think, if God said it, it shall be done. And that's why I still, to this day, say this. There is coming a day in this church where we will have people lined up around the building waiting to get into Revive Church. This is why I still say to this day that we're going to have a fully paved cement parking lot all around this building. And every time I pull in and those two divots in the ground make my car jump up every time I hit it to park in the grass, I always go back to, God, I know that it's going to happen, that every single service that we have, every time we open our doors, we will see people be baptized in every single service, because every single service, someone will give their lives to Jesus. I still say that even though I haven't seen it. And the more I say it, the more ridiculous it sounds because we still don't see it. But I've got to learn to talk the talk before I walk the walk. Because if I tried to walk out what I don't believe, I'll fall flat on my face and it'll give me an excuse to not trust God. But if I speak it, it will happen. If I speak it, then my mind and my heart and my soul and my emotions and every part of me will walk toward what I am believing God for. You've got to learn. Stop walking the walk before you talk the talk. Instead, start speaking out. Talk the talk before you walk the walk and watch God move.